Story 1. The Man at the Gas Station. This story comes from a woman I'll call Priya. She's in her early 30s, lives in Texas, and at the time this happened she was 28 and driving home from visiting her parents in a city about 3 hours away. A drive she'd done many times. Familiar highway, familiar stops, completely routine. She left her parents' house at around 7 p.m. on a Sunday. The drive was uneventful for the first 2 hours. She stopped at a gas station off the interstate around 9 p.m., a large travel plaza, well lit, the kind of place with a dozen pumps and a convenience store and a fast food attached. Busy enough that there were 5 or 6 other cars at the pumps when she pulled in. She said she'd stopped there before on this drive. It was a known quantity. She pulled up to a pump, got out, started filling the tank. She said she was on her phone while she waited, texting her roommate to say she'd be home in about an hour. Completely ordinary. The gas station was bright, there were people around, she was relaxed. She said she became aware of the man before she understood why. He was at the pump across from hers. She said she noticed him in the peripheral way you notice people in shared spaces, not focusing on him, just registering his presence. He was standing at his pump, facing her direction. She said she'd been at the pump for maybe 2 minutes at this point, and in those 2 minutes she hadn't seen him pick up the nozzle or interact with his car in any way. He was just standing there facing her direction. She looked up from her phone. He was looking at her. She said she held eye contact for a second the way you do when you realize someone is looking at you, and then she looked away. Normal. She went back to her phone. She said about 30 seconds later she looked up again. He was still looking at her, still hadn't touched his pump, still hadn't gotten back in his car. She said she assessed the situation the way she'd learned to assess situations like this. Gas station, well lit, other people present. She was standing between her car and the pump which put metal between her and him. She was fine. She was being stared at by a strange man which was unpleasant but not dangerous. She finished filling the tank, replaced the nozzle, and went into the convenience store to use the bathroom and get a coffee for the last hour of the drive. She was in the store for maybe 5 minutes. She used the bathroom, got a coffee, paid. She said she thought about the man at the pump while she was inside. She said she told herself she was being oversensitive. She pushed out the door and walked back toward her car. He was standing next to it. Not at his pump anymore, not at his own car. Standing at the back corner of her car, between the rear bumper and the pump island, in a position that would require her to pass within a few feet of him to get to the driver's door. She stopped walking. She said she stood about 15 feet away and looked at him, and he looked at her and he said nothing, just standing at the back of her car, waiting. She said she did not approach her car. She turned around and went back into the convenience store. She went to the counter and told the cashier, a young woman about her age, that there was a man standing next to her car outside and she was uncomfortable. She asked if there was a manager or security. The cashier looked through the window. She said she saw the man. She called her manager. The manager, a heavy-set man in his 50s, came out from the back. He looked through the window. He said he'd go outside and Priya should stay in the store. She watched through the window. The manager went outside and approached the man and spoke to him. She said the conversation was brief. She couldn't hear it. At the end of it, the man walked to his car, a dark sedan she hadn't noticed before, parked one pump over, got in, and drove away. The manager came back inside. He said the man had told him he was just stretching his legs. He said the man was gone now and she could go to her car. He offered to walk her out, which she accepted. She got in her car and locked it and pulled out of the gas station and got back on the highway. She said she thought about that phrase the whole rest of the drive. Stretching his legs, the specific absurdity of describing standing motionless next to a stranger's car while staring at them as stretching your legs. The rehearsed quality of the explanation, she said, like it had been prepared. She said there's one detail she didn't mention to the manager that she's thought about many times since. When she came out of the convenience store and saw the man standing at the back of her car, he wasn't just standing there. He had his phone out, pointed at her car. She said it looked like he was photographing her license plate. She said she didn't know what to do with that at the time. She didn't know what it meant. She filed a report with the local police non-emergency line when she got home. She gave them the description of the man and his car and what she'd seen. The officer she spoke to took down the information and told her to let them know if anything further happened. Nothing further happened that she knows of. She said she knows of is doing a lot of work in that sentence. She said she changed her route on that drive after that night. She said she stops at different gas stations now, never the same one twice in a row, always well before dark if she can manage it. She said she knows those precautions might be excessive. She said she doesn't care. She said the thing she can't stop thinking about is the photograph of her license plate. Because if that's what it was, if he was photographing her plate, then the encounter wasn't random. It wasn't a strange man being strange in the general way that strange men sometimes are at gas stations. It was a strange man acquiring specific information. Her plate, her vehicle, the means to find her car again. She said she thinks about the database you can access with a license plate number. She said she knows it exists. She said she hopes he didn't know it existed. She said she hopes. Story 2, The Hiking Trail. This story comes from a man I'll call Connor. He's in his late 20s, lives in Colorado, and at the time this happened he was 26 and doing a solo day hike on a popular trail in the mountains west of Denver. He said popular is the key word. This wasn't a remote backcountry situation. This was a well-trafficked trail that sees hundreds of hikers on a good weekend day. He'd been on it before. He knew it well. He said he'd never felt anything but comfortable on that trail. He left the trailhead at 8 a.m. on a Saturday in August. Good weather, good conditions. The trail was already busy. He passed a dozen people in the first mile. He said it felt like exactly what it was, a popular trail on a summer Saturday. He was about 4 miles in when he first saw the man. Coming toward him on the trail, heading downhill while Connor was heading up. The man was alone, which wasn't unusual, plenty of solo hikers on that trail. He was wearing hiking gear, had a pack. He looked like any other hiker. As he passed Connor, he made eye contact and nodded, the standard trail greeting, and Connor nodded back and kept moving. He said something registered as slightly wrong in the moment of passing, but he couldn't identify what it was. He kept walking. He reached the summit area around noon, ate lunch, enjoyed the view, talked to a few other hikers. Normal. Good. He started back down the trail around 12:30. He was about 2 miles into the descent when he saw the man again. Coming toward him again, heading up the trail, which meant he'd turned around at some point and was now making a second trip up. Connor said he noted it but didn't think too much about it. Some hikers do laps, go up and down twice, especially if they're training. He nodded at the man again. The man looked at him for a moment longer than the first time before nodding back. Connor kept descending. He was maybe a mile from the trailhead when he heard footsteps behind him on the trail. He said the trail had thinned out by that point, mid-afternoon, most people heading back, and the footsteps were close enough that he expected to be passed. He moved to the right to let whoever it was go by. Nobody passed him. He said he looked back over his shoulder. The man was about 30 feet behind him on the trail, not gaining, not losing ground, maintaining a consistent 30 feet of distance. Connor kept walking. He said he did the mental calculation every hiker does when they become aware of someone behind them on a trail. 30 feet is not close. It's a normal following distance on a trail. The man was hiking at a similar pace and hadn't approached. There was nothing objectively alarming about it. He said he knew the man had been going uphill when he passed him a mile back. For the man to be behind him now going downhill meant he had turned around again within the last mile and was now descending behind Connor. He said he did the math. The man had gone up and down twice and was now descending again within the same period that Connor had gone up once and was coming down. That was a lot of vertical for a day hike. It was possible. It was also, if you weren't training and you weren't a very serious athlete, unusual. He kept walking, kept the man in his peripheral awareness. The 30 feet held, not closing, not widening, held. He came around a bend in the trail, and there was a family coming up, 2 parents, 3 kids, a dog. He stepped aside to let them pass, and while he did, he looked back at the man. The man had also stopped. He was standing on the trail, looking at the view, or appearing to look at the view 30 feet behind Connor, waiting for the family to pass. Connor said that was the moment it stopped being a thing he could dismiss. Because there was no reason to stop and wait. The trail was wide enough that both directions of traffic could move simultaneously. The man had stopped specifically because Connor had stopped. The distance had held because it was being maintained intentionally. Connor started moving faster. Not running. He said he didn't want to run. He said running on a mountain trail feels like an invitation for something, and also the footing wasn't good for speed. He moved faster and he watched the distance behind him. It held. Exactly 30 feet. However fast Connor moved, the man maintained 30 feet. He said he was about half a mile from the trailhead when he caught up to another solo hiker, a woman moving at a moderate pace. He said he made a decision and slowed to match her pace and said, "Excuse me, sorry to bother you." And he explained that there was someone following him on the trail and he was going to walk with her to the trailhead if she didn't mind. He said he watched her face while he said it and she didn't look at him like he was crazy. She said of course and looked back up the trail. She told him she'd seen the man earlier on her way up and something about him had bothered her too. She didn't know what, just something. They walked the last half mile together. Connor said at some point in that half mile he looked back and the man was gone. Not fallen back further, gone. Off the trail into the trees, turned back again. Just gone. They reached the trailhead. He thanked the woman, got her name in case he needed to mention her to anyone, and they went to their separate cars. He sat in his car for a moment. He called the ranger station and reported what had happened, a man on the trail who had appeared to follow him for the last mile of the descent, maintaining a consistent distance. He described the man as best he could. The ranger said he'd note it and pass it along to the trail patrol. Connor said he's been back to that trail twice since then, both times with other people. He said he doesn't go alone anymore, on that trail or any trail he doesn't know extremely well. He said the thing that specifically bothers him, the detail he said he's turned over the most, is the 3 encounters. Passing the man heading down while Connor was heading up. Passing the man again heading up while Connor was heading down. The man appearing behind Connor heading down a mile later. He said he's mapped that out on the trail map several times. He said for the sequence to work the way he experienced it, the man would have had to move significantly faster than a normal hiking pace between the second and third encounter to get behind Connor the way he did. He said he doesn't know if the man had been on the trail before Connor arrived. Doesn't know if he'd identified Connor at the trailhead. Doesn't know if the whole morning was the setup for the afternoon. He said he thinks about the family with the dog. The man stopping when Connor stopped. 30 feet held to the inch. He said he thinks about what the trailhead would have looked like if he'd been alone the whole way down. He said he doesn't finish that thought. He said he's learned not to finish it. Story 3, The Neighborhood. This is the last story and the one that stayed with me the longest after reading it. It comes from a woman I'll call Sarah. She's in her mid-30s, lives in Ohio, and what she described happened over a period of 3 weeks in her own neighborhood. Not a single encounter, but a series of them. A pattern that built slowly enough that she kept second-guessing herself at each stage, and that by the time she was certain something was wrong had progressed further than she was comfortable with. She said she wants people to hear the whole sequence. She said she thinks the sequence is the most important part because it illustrates how these things work, how something escalates in increments small enough to dismiss each time until you can't dismiss it anymore. Sarah lived in a residential neighborhood in Columbus. Single-family homes, quiet streets, the kind of neighborhood where people walked their dogs in the evening and waved at each other from driveways. She walked for exercise, 30 to 40 minutes, usually in the evening around 7 or 8 p.m., a route she'd established over 2 years of living there. Same streets, roughly the same time, comfortable and familiar. She first saw the man on a Tuesday in September. She was about 15 minutes into her walk when she passed him on the sidewalk. He was coming toward her, walking in the opposite direction. She said he was unremarkable, average height, average build, nondescript clothing. She said she wouldn't have remembered him at all except that as they passed, he turned and looked back at her. She said people do that. She'd done it herself. You pass someone and something about the interaction makes you glance back. It wasn't alarming. She kept walking. She saw him again on Thursday of the same week. Same street, similar time, coming toward her again. She registered his face this time, the same man from Tuesday. She thought neighborhood coincidence. People walk the same routes. She passed him, kept walking. He didn't turn this time. She saw him the following Tuesday. Same street, same direction. This time as she passed him, she made brief eye contact, and he held it a beat too long before looking away. She said the beat too long is something she's tried to quantify since and can't. It's not a measurable thing, it's a felt thing. A fraction of a second beyond comfortable. She kept walking. She said by the second week she was aware of him as a presence on her route. Not afraid, aware. She said there's a difference and the difference matters. She was noticing him the way you notice a car that takes the same turns you do, not alarmed, just tracking. He appeared on Wednesday of the second week. Different street this time, not the usual street where she'd seen him before, a street that was part of her route but further along it. She said she processed this as she walked past him. Different street. He was on a different part of her route. He appeared on Friday of the second week. On the street she used to loop back toward her house, the last section of her walk. She said this was the third different street she'd seen him on. All three were part of her established route. She said she went home and thought about that. 3 different streets, all on her route, all in the window of her usual walking time. She thought about coincidence and how many times you could invoke it before it stopped being a reasonable explanation. She said she decided to change her route. The following Tuesday, she walked a completely different set of streets. Nothing from her old route. New streets, new direction, a route she'd never walked before. She saw him on a street she'd never walked before. She said she stopped when she saw him. She said she actually stopped walking mid-stride and stood on the sidewalk. He was about half a block ahead, walking in the same direction as her, and when she stopped, he didn't stop. He kept walking at his pace, and she watched him move away down the street until he turned a corner and was gone. She said she stood there on a street she'd chosen that morning specifically, because she'd never used it before, and she understood that something was happening that had moved beyond coincidence by a very large margin. She went home and called her sister. She said she needed to tell someone the sequence out loud to confirm she wasn't manufacturing a pattern from unrelated data. She told her sister everything, every encounter, every street, the route change. Her sister listened, and when she finished there was a pause and her sister asked her if she was sure about the route change. The new street. She hadn't walked it before. He was there. Sarah said yes, she was sure. Her sister said she needed to call the police. Sarah said she'd been going back and forth on that because she didn't know what she would say. She'd seen a man on her walks multiple times. He'd made eye contact with her. He was on a street she'd never walked before. None of that was a crime. None of that was something she could point to and say this is the thing, this is the moment it became reportable. Her sister said she should report it anyway. She said the police could at least have a record of it. Sarah called the non-emergency line that evening. She spoke to an officer and told the sequence. She said the officer was professional and did not dismiss her. He asked for a description of the man, which she gave. He said he'd flag it and increase patrol in her neighborhood and encouraged her to let them know immediately if she saw the man again. She said she appreciated that he didn't make her feel like she was overreacting. She stopped walking in the evenings after that. She said she wasn't willing to be on the streets in her neighborhood alone until she understood what was happening. She walked in the mornings instead, earlier, when there were more people around. She saw the man one more time. 2 weeks after the last sighting, on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. She was coming back from a coffee shop 2 blocks from her house, a route she'd started using more since the evening walks stopped. He was standing on the corner half a block from her house. She said he was just standing there, not walking. Standing on the corner, and she was walking toward him, and she realized in a few steps she was going to have to walk past him to get to her house. She stopped. She got her phone out. She called the police non-emergency line right there on the sidewalk. She said she told them she was at the corner of her street, and the man she'd reported 2 weeks ago was standing half a block from her house. She said she kept her eyes on him the whole time she was on the phone. He looked at her, looked at the phone at her ear, looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked away, turned the corner and walked away at a normal pace, not hurrying, not running, just walking away. The police came about 10 minutes later. She gave them everything, every encounter, every date she could remember, the description, the location where she'd just seen him. The officer took everything down and said he'd look into it. She said she never saw the man again after that. The increased patrol in the area, the phone call, whatever combination of things changed, she doesn't know. He didn't come back. But here's the thing Sarah included in her message that I think is the most important part of the whole account. About a month after the last sighting, she was talking to a neighbor, a woman who lived 3 streets over, someone she knew casually. The neighbor mentioned that she'd had a strange experience a few weeks back. She'd been walking in the neighborhood in the evenings and had noticed a man on her route several times. Enough times that she'd started to feel uncomfortable. Sarah asked her to describe the man. She said the neighbor described a man who matched the description she'd given the police exactly. She said the neighbor had never reported it. She said the neighbor hadn't been sure she wasn't imagining it. She said the neighbor had just quietly stopped her evening walks and hoped it went away. Sarah said she told her neighbor to call the police and report it even now, weeks later. She said her neighbor did. She said she thinks about that a lot. 2 women on adjacent streets, both experiencing the same pattern, both second-guessing themselves, neither aware of the other. She said the self-doubt is the thing she wants people to hear about. The way each individual encounter is small enough to explain away. The way the pattern only becomes undeniable when you put it all together. The way the doubt is almost designed into the experience, engineered into it, she said, because the increments are calibrated to stay just below the threshold of certainty until it's further along than you wanted it to be. She said she wishes she'd called the police after the route change, after the new street. She said that was the moment she was certain, and she spent another 2 weeks being uncertain about her certainty before she made the call. She said trust it earlier. Whatever the feeling is, whatever the moment is when the pattern becomes undeniable, trust it earlier than you think you need to. She said the man 3 streets over probably had others. She said the man 3 streets over was probably doing what he did with a pretty good understanding of how long it would take someone to feel certain enough to call. She said he almost calculated it right. She said almost. Those are the 3 stories. Priya at the gas station, Connor on the trail, Sarah in her neighborhood. 3 different states, 3 different situations, 3 different people who experienced the specific and disorienting process of recognizing that something was wrong with someone they didn't know. The thing I keep coming back to is what all 3 of them described, that initial moment of registration, the awareness before the understanding, Priya noticing the man before she knew why, Connor feeling something wrong in the moment of passing before he could identify it, Sarah processing that beat too long in an eye contact and filing it before she knew what she was filing it under. That response exists for a reason. We talk about gut feelings and intuition and hunches, and what all of those things actually are is your brain processing information faster than your conscious thought can keep up with. Pattern recognition operating below the surface. threat assessment happening in the background. Priya's brain was telling her something at the pump before she looked up from her phone. Connor's brain registered something wrong in the first passing before he could name it. Sarah's brain noted the beat too long 2 weeks before she let herself take it seriously. All three of them had the right read early. All three of them spent time arguing themselves out of it. They all got out okay. Not because the gut feeling was wrong. Because eventually they listened to it.